Despite my symptoms not abating, it was Maddie who insisted we visit Pak Karno, as she was becoming very troubled. Sure enough, Pak Karno discovered her to be infected by a very strong entity, the strongest he'd ever removed from her. Along with other herbs, he advised her to drink green coconut water for 3 days. This involved going to Wonogiri to locate the correct type of coconuts, with a pinkish tinge to the meat. But what shocked me was that Pak Karno removed an equally strong entity from me. As it had had more time to infect me, I had to drink the coconut water for 70 days. This seemed to work very quickly for me, but Maddie was troubled for longer, as is so often the case. Why was I so shocked? Well, Pak Karno explained that this was the Bambu Gantung and Kayu spell, involving needle-like strings of the bamboo skin and a wooden log. Initially, the strings would provide access to the spell, and both I and Maddie regularly feel needle-like sensations on our skin, whilst the log feels just as though one has been hit by a log, often on the leg, which takes a long time to recover. So this was what I had believed so long to be my new form of sciatica. And now my explanation that it was more about my brain than my leg made sense, but it may well have prevented signals getting to my leg and crippled me, as the wife of the youngest brother-in-law came close to. Such events are often preceded, or is it proceeded, by an outbreak of herpes on my feet and toes, or at least they seem like herpes. It is partially this which has led me to believe that what we call jinn are either connected to viruses, or even that viruses are jinn. Certainly it would seem to suggest that such attacks have a strong psychological element, resulting in stress or precipitated by stress. There was also the conjunctivitis that I've kept getting for these 12 years. I now associate it with a black magic attack, but when it started I was convinced that it was indicative of herpes in the eyes, and even bought some drops for this. Now it's becoming worse, and often accompanied by ear infections, not unlike the fungal infection known as Singapore ear. I, however, come to see it as much as a sign of malevolence leaving me, or at least me fighting attack, as being overcome by a spell. Yes, these symptoms are becoming more regular and pernicious, whilst the main effects less so. This suggests that the spell casting is becoming stronger and more regular, but that we are becoming more adept at fighting it. This would seem to agree with my premonition that all would end and our adversaries would overstretch themselves. It would also seem there's a very strong connection between gut bacteria and mental health. Western medicine is beginning to see this as meaning that we should encourage healthy bacteria within the gut to have positive mental health. But the relationship is more complex than simply cause and effect. Could it be the knowledge that we're being attacked by black magic, which creates stress, and that this stress results in changes to our gut bacteria? This then sets up a vicious cycle of symptoms I have listed, which leads to more stress. The black magic then becoming self-fulfilling. This would validate my strategy of raising my vibrations to rebalance the bacteria in gut. It would also explain why this seems to be a constant battle, as the bacteria is constantly changing. This would also seem to explain my observation about the relationship between regular bowel movements and black magic. All too often when under attack I become constipated. I've therefore come to see regular bowel movements as releasing the malevolence. Some may see this as expelling jinn. Muslims believe that toilets are dirty places where jinn dwell. Unfortunately, so many take it literally. But could it be more related to gut bacteria? But this new information means that the Duke brother was not simply targeting blood relatives, and that the energy was spilling out to the spouses and the neighbours, but he was actively targeting others. Certainly I was a target, as was the wife of the youngest brother, but could this include the family of the brother in Sumatra? And that was making, and that was what was making them so consumed with jealousy and greed. Could it also include ennui and piety? Then there is Branwell's schizophrenia. Also, there's the incredible bad luck and illness that Maspera and his family have experienced. I'm sure that his Duke brother is involved, but could it also suggest a connection with my own Duke brother, whom is also his stepbrother? Whilst all this may be possible, what I must resist is letting my speculation become fear. For this fear can then take hold and worsen the effect of the spells. What this does mean is that I've been a target for some 12 years. In other words, since I first met with the Duke brother. Could he have first infected me when I visited his mother's grave? Quite possibly. But maybe more likely he had fed something infected. I'd been fed something infected by an entity, the most effective way of getting something malicious into the host. The first time I became aware of something strange was after we'd bought the house in Jakarta. Again, I became very ill, including it in affecting my walking. But I concluded it was chikungunya, despite a blood test some years later in the UK not finding any evidence of this. Like in Vietnam, I had become very ill following a visit to Manado, and I also concluded it was a strange tropical disease like in Vietnam, one that was amongst the worst experiences I can ever recall. Then, of course, these 12 years have been characterised by a tsunami of bad luck. In fact, this would not be my first book, had I not had something to write about. So whilst I may not be able to blame my brother-in-law for all that's gone wrong in my life recently, he certainly could be to blame for much of it. These 12 years coincide with Southeast Asian countries somewhat turning their back on the West and embracing China. As always in Asia, when a nation goes out of favour, the government and population take it out on individuals from that nation. Thus I've justified my bad luck, but again it's been so overwhelming. All the magic would need to do would be to extenuate the negative forces which surrounded me. But again, I must focus on raising my vibrations and not sinking back into despair. Whilst I was somewhat depressed when I first realised the enormity of this new information, after it had sunk in, it was liberating. As soon as I felt symptoms, I knew to use the light and the love, rather than giving in to them and taking to bed, including those few flu-like symptoms which could last for weeks, even months. If I didn't pander to them, I could quickly defeat them. But what does this tell us about the medical conditions themselves? I've long felt that health problems to originate in the mind, and that Western medicine to be a sophisticated placebo. You see, when I become active, I forgot about my symptoms, and all too often they go away, just as Western medicine convinces us that the symptoms will go away. Could this also explain why I've been unaffected by the health problem of the health crisis? Maybe foolishly, or maybe not. I'd simply refuse to believe that it existed. With this new thought, I was better off changing my vibrations than giving in to the symptoms. Whatever the source of the problem, I had a way of doing it. You may conclude from this that I have too much time on my hands, and you'd be correct, for without the time to consider my symptoms and their cause, I would often not notice them. This is not to diminish the very real symptoms and sometimes extreme pain that I have experienced. But what I have come to understand is that what we call illness are simply symptoms, often symptoms of something unwanted leaving the body. Thus those things I associate with black magic attack, even the worst effects like the sciatica-like symptoms, are actually signs that my body is fighting off black magic, and not its effect on me. Western medicine treats the symptoms when it relieves them. We believe that it is working, and we feel strong enough to actually fight the illness. But the symptoms themselves were a sign that we were already doing this. Just as Pak Karno and I need to convince our patients that we are relieving them, when we both know that the patient does it for themselves. Whether we choose to interpret these signals from our bodies as evidence of black magic or illness is all about our belief system. But through meditation we can comprehend the underlying issues. For me, these were my Jungian shadow, left by my mother and to a lesser extent my former partner, whom she convinced was my son. Indeed, Pak Karno knows that I have realised this, and he gets impatient when I ask him to check me, for he knows that I have already learned all that I need to, and simply have confidence that I can use this knowledge. In fact, this thought is more profound than I had first believed. You see, there is evidence that not only can we think ourselves better, but even more that we can think ourselves ill. This includes the ageing process itself. The evidence seems to suggest that the brain decided this or that part of the body no longer works and it shuts down. Eerily similar to my experience of the sciatica-like symptoms, as though the brain could no longer communicate with my legs. Not only is it irrelevant that we believe to be the cause of our symptoms, just maybe it's better to believe that they are a product of black magic. Why? Well, if we believe we can fight black magic through our own will, then we can prevent the brain from shutting down. But if we believe it to be an illness or simply old age, we're in the hands of Western medical professionals and their increasingly expensive medication. If we have confidence in medicine, it might work, but far better to engage in a struggle with black magic. And whilst contemplating this one evening, I was unable to sleep. I could hear the Duke and brother knocking wood together. So this was the Bambu Gantung and Kaio spell, and all I needed to do was raise my vibrations and it would never reach me. The battle was really heating up, and I was directly challenging the Duke and brother. I would see him sweeping around our house, in other words, placing a spell to create disharmony between Maddie and I. I would immediately resweep the area, then explain to Maddie what was happening so that she could dismiss such thoughts. But it did seem to be highly effective, especially on Maddie, even if she's aware of it. It would seem that this sweeping spell is my Duke and brother's strongest. I remember many times being overcome with a spell that I felt I would die, but most memorably in the Egret Hotel in Manchester. Certainly it was a spell to split us up, making Maddie jealous and believing that I'd abandoned her in the hotel in Manchester. She even phoned 2 old boyfriends to save her from her fate. As I was collecting tinder for the fire, underneath a tea tree, the best tinder, I found a small snake, maybe hibernating. I wasn't one bit frightened, nor felt any desire to kill it. In fact, I marvelled how beautiful it was, with its iridescent colours. Whilst a snake can have malevolent meanings, because it sheds its skin, it's also associated with dumping baggage and moving on. Less than a week later, when sweeping our front path, I found a snake skin, just to reinforce the message. The reason for me sweeping the front path itself is important. 2 days previously, I'd spotted the dukun brother walking from our house with a guilty look. I concluded that he'd been sweeping outside our house. Sure enough, that day Maddie became irrationally jealous, and I could feel those signs of black magic once more. It would seem that this sweeping spell was designed to create disharmony between Maddie and I, and in doing so we were open for other spells to attack us. Cleanliness is important in fighting magic, both personal and around the home. Indeed, spirits seem very much attracted to dirty and untidy homes, especially untidy rooms like box rooms. Could this explain why so many Indonesian males, and especially my dukun brother, sweep their home and the perimeter of the garden first thing every morning? I think I must do so. Thus I concluded I needed to sweep the garden more regularly, especially after it had already been swept by my brother-in-law. As I reswept where the dukun had, it became apparent that whilst more meticulous than I, he'd simply swept the leaves into the drain hole. Whilst not a major problem during the dry season, it could become a blockage during the wet season. Indeed, I would go so far as to say, as regardless of the spell, his efforts were doing more harm than good. To my mind, a few leaves on our path in the dry season may provide shelter for snakes. They're nothing like as problematic as a blocked drain during the wet season. Maybe this was the sweeping spell, but in my meditation I kept getting messages that Maddie is the source of my problems, which is factually true, for had I never met her, none of this would have happened. But then I had my own demons in the UK. Could Maddie really be trying to kill me through black magic? My meditation certainly seemed to suggest this. Each time I'm confronted by Maddie in my meditation, I embrace her and make it clear that I have chosen Maddie and will stay with her, as I did when she lost her mind. Just maybe this is another test for me. You see, I've been running all my life, running from my mother, running from my ex-partner, running from other psychopaths and narcissists I allowed access to my thoughts. But Maddie offers me unconditional love, and I love her unconditionally. If I have to choose a battle between material comfort and Maddie, I choose Maddie. Just maybe this is the test. I can opt for comfort and repeat the cycles of the past, or I can move on with Maddie at my side. But this running is a form of emotional suicide. It means that I've had to psychologically detach from my own mother while still loving her. I could never resolve the conflict with my mother, and thus created a shield to protect myself from this conflict. But in doing so, pushed away other people. Yes, including those I loved, running at the first sign of problems, thus devaluing myself for always running, a process which would have led to my own narcissism had I not broken free. If you recall, when Maddie first met Pak Karno, he removed 18 entities that had infected her. I'd long known that my brother-in-law was also working with Mas Perwa's dukun brother-in-law, and that his power had waned. Indeed, he now wanders around the desa like a madman, not unusual in our desa, where the effects of inbreeding are much in evidence. Then when I saw my dukun brother's own dukun brother-in-law visiting him from Wonogiri, I had another piece of the jigsaw. When Maddie was at her worst, this dukun from Wonogiri had defiantly parked his car on our parking bay. Then later her condition always became worse. Unknown to me, the dukun brother had solicited money from the brother in Sumatra to get the dukun in Wonogiri to help Maddie, but as you would guess, it had made her much worse. In fact, there'd been a family meeting, and I'd refused to now allow another dukun to see Maddie, let alone pay for it. So this was orchestrated behind my back. something one has to get used to as a foreigner in Indonesia, despite often having to pick up the pieces, even the blame for what you'd specifically stated you did not want to happen. As we left Gunung Kidul, the dukun from Wonogiri had visited once again with his family. And my dukun brother and the immediate family all inspecting our home. In the past, this would have sent me into fear about what spells they were casting, but I now know they are fearful of me, believing that I was using magic against them, unable to comprehend that I'd mastered the arts that they had spent years learning and perfecting, never sinking to their low vibration, but matching them by raising my own. Nevertheless, this is probably the occasion when the snake was introduced to our home. But once again, I cannot feel triumphant, as once the ego returns, that's the opportunity to get an attack into me. Indeed, this has been 12 years in which my dukun brother has been the predator and I the prey, playing a game if you like, but a game in which I can only lose and never win. Unfortunately, I have to conclude the same is true for all psychopaths and a good many narcissists, that our world is shaped by these predators, intent on destroying society. Indeed, this really does now appear to be a psychopathic battle, one which narcissists also engage in, and in such battles I can never win, but only lose. For the psychopath, everyone they meet, but especially their family and loved ones, including children, are seen as being in competition with them and therefore need to be destroyed. A psychopath has no desire to compete nor argue, but simply to destroy and eradicate others. I did not choose this fight, but for those attempting to harm me, it's a matter of life and death. To lose means they are nothing. They are nothing, are dead, exploited, humiliated, nothing. But to win means that everyone will look up to them and have powers over others. Everyone is against the psychopath and determined to beat them. Hence their interaction is a mortal fight. Thus my brother-in-law is actually a psychopathic serial killer, engaged in a mortal battle with all he encounters, engaged in a fantasy which few of us can comprehend. But what we do with someone like my dukun brother? He's too stupid to have a career in business or political leadership, so the only other alternative is prison. Is it not better to keep him in the community? But the community needs to be aware of his danger and to understand it. Like the poisonous snake, he has a right to life, even our compassion, but we must accept that we cannot help him. We can only avoid him, both physically and above all mentally and emotionally. Being a mortal fight, it's a fight with no boundaries. This is why when using black magic in Indonesia, the stakes are immediately raised by attempting to kill the victim. There are no morals, and any method for winning is acceptable, including criminality and what others would consider transgressive. They do this without any care for the repercussions, karma if you like, as the battle is a battle of life and death. Thus, whatever the consequences, they must win. The psychopath is always right, and the opposition has betrayed them. A betrayal of their fantasy which denies what they call reality. This is why the magician never gives up, as to give up is to lose, and to lose is death to the psychopath. Thus it's a complete waste of my time to ask Allah to fill my brother-in-law's heart with love, or hoping that the repercussions will make him see sense and will stop. For the psychopath, the battle is a zero-sum game. The competition must be destroyed, and therefore there can never be a compromise. The only possible end to this battle is mine or my brother-in-law's death. But if I throw myself into this battle, then I become the psychopath and have lost my humanity, and therefore lost everything. The same is true for business and economics in Indonesia. There's no notion of increasing the size of the cake, nor the collective good, simply that one's gain is another's loss. Thus competing by all means, fair or foul, is the only possible strategy. The law of the jungle, eat or be eaten. A zero-sum game in which my brother-in-law wants to take everything from me, all my possessions, my thoughts and my life. He is only focused on winning and death. I would understand if you wish to call this evil. He certainly doesn't think like the majority. But is this evil? Is he not more a victim than us? For he's already dead, a zombie if you like. Thus to judge him by what we consider to be normal is erroneous. We do not judge the poisonous snake to be evil, simply something to avoid, even though they can, at times, appear to have human-like emotions. They don't. It also means that I've wasted 12 years of my life trying to explain black magic and what was happening to me. Indeed, all my books have been devoted for this, where there can be no explanation, as the psychopathic fantasy is not mine, and I could never comprehend it. In this respect, maybe the religious conservatives have a point, that we should not engage with magic. Even my exploration magic has been a dead end, for really I should have explored psychopathy. Needless to say, psychopathic thinking dominates the religiously conservative, and therefore it would be wrong to take their arguments at face value. But yes, magic is dangerous, because the psychopath is dangerous, just as a venomous snake is dangerous. Indeed, magic itself is part of the psychopath's fantasy. It is the mechanism by which the psychopath draws you into their fantasy. I've spent too long within this fantasy. Yes, I have learnt so much, but eventually I've returned to psychology and religion. Yes, mysticism has a role in my religion, but you could see this as high magic, as its aim is to become closer to Allah. And nevertheless, I was correct about one thing, and that there is a degree of benevolence within my brother-in-law's battle, for his fantasy of the world to him is the only possible way. His fantasy is his reality. Thus he is a good person, even a superhero, a saviour to mankind. To defeat me is to engage me in his true fantasy of the world. For him I have got everything so very wrong, and if I submit to him, I will understand the truth in his fantasy. But I'll always be an external object. His only recall of me is when I act with independence. That is not submitting to his will. The less I submit to him, even by simply being happy, I'm threatening him, threatening his very existence. Does this not explain the crisis in our society, which society now seems to be in? Andrzej Lobaczewski suggests that pathocracy exists in which psychopaths have established themselves in position of power, imposing a psychopathic rule on our society. This is now creating an endemic of psychopathy, even amongst those normally not seen as psychopaths. Remember the doctors refusing to provide me with a booster. Well, there does seem to be substantial evidence to support this. Under such conditions, no area of social life can function normally, with pathocracy eventually destroying everything. What has changed since Lobaczewski is the merger of the political, business and not-for-profit. You may not see anything sinister in the Tony Blair Foundation, the Clinton Foundation, but are maybe more concerned by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but all would be examples of the point I'm making. These conditions are being greatly enhanced by the application of automation and so-called artificial intelligence, which is capable of creating new malignant authoritarianism, far more pervasive than has ever been possible in the past. Indeed, artificial intelligence, or the artificial large language models, replicates the seeming intelligence of the narcissists. It's a shallow intelligence without meaning. Both can have the appearance of knowledge and a program to convince us that this is intelligence. Both provide a tsunami of data which will misrepresent and lie when they do not have a solution. Neither can enter into a deep intellectual conversation, simply throwing out more and more data, which may be valid, may be spurious, may even be fictitious, but most often is simply irrelevant. In fact, they've been trained to pass the Turing test, to convince humans that they are human. But a machine has no morals, therefore lying is very much a part of their repertoire to pass the test. Think of how many times I've engaged with conversation on social media, to be inundated with data, including those that are engaged with addressing your points. For me, this data is often from Al-Quran or a Hadith, and it would take me hours, if not weeks, to check all this data. But the aim is to disarm me, make me look well-informed. Indeed, few of us know all the contents of Al-Quran, and certainly could not provide a reliable translation from the original Arabic. Most likely these are AI bots, although could certainly have been a human narcissist, maybe even a human narcissist utilising AI programs to make you seem ill-informed. Thus our reification of artificial intelligence is really a glorification of narcissism. Our engagement with such conversations leading to great harm to us. But even more pernicious is that we are allowing decisions to be taken by these digital narcissists. At its worst, it's being applied to health, and particularly mental health, making narcissists of us all. The same would be true for artificial intelligence in education, which is also occurring at breakneck speed. A narcissist takeover of humanity, if you like. Because pathocracy destroys everything, it has destroyed science itself. That science no longer objective, but the basis of the control system imposed by the psychopaths. Decision making has been subcontracted to an increasingly small cadre of experts, rather than a broad spectrum of thinkers. Thus, a corporate structure of experts and large corporations are the best way to organise society, because this is logical and efficient. But it's only logical and efficient if we dispose of the very essence of what this is to be human. The beast of arbitrary calamity has always been with us. Andrzej Lobachowski, Political Ponerology. Strangely, it would also seem that our scriptures seem to be warning us about exactly this. If we step away from the psychopathic right brain insistence that the scriptures are literal, they seem to be pointing to the importance of personality in shaping our world. Furthermore, that we, but probably not the psychopath, can indeed co-create our reality and move closer to God by using personal alchemy. But all this is hidden in tribalism and arguments about which religion or branch of religion is the right one, as though God can be constrained to a single path. Worse still, there is no room for religion in the logical and efficient world. Now this is truly a psychopathic interpretation of the scriptures that we have all fallen for, at least for a time.